Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
I'm Lynda, a college counselor, co-author of the book, The Calm College Method, a scholarship evaluator, a mom with a student at the University of Chicago, and I help families make thoughtful, well-informed decisions about college.
Hi, I'm Lisa, a clinical psychologist and a college counselor and a co-author of the book, The Calm College Method. I have one daughter who's graduated from college, one daughter who's about to go to college, and a son who's about to go to high school.
I'm Hilary Dickman, a parent of two and Senior Assistant Director of Admission at Colorado College.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
This week in the news, Hilary and Susan join me to talk about what do we mean when we refer to buckets. We talked about buckets in our last conversation with Standard Strong and how students can stand out. And I was already recording a segment with Hilary and Susan, so I asked them if they could do a segment on buckets. So that'll be part 4, and I'm extending that series based on your feedback to go 6 sessions. And then Hilary and Susan are back. This time we're taking a question from Michael. Michael got a D in Algebra 2. He now has an A- in pre-calc, and he wants to know, is there anything he can do to not have that D sabotage his chances at the colleges he applies to? And then Lynda and Lisa will be doing a 1-part college spotlight on State Tech in Lynn, Missouri. Listen and enjoy. And I have to say, happy birthday to my wife, Anitra. It's her birthday today. She's older than me, so I got to pay respect to your elders. And she's still in Raleigh, North Carolina with Karis. They're best of friends, best of friends. They'll be driving back tomorrow, but happy birthday, Anitra. All right, friends, let's transition to the conversation with Susan and Hilary as we explain what we mean when we talk about buckets when it comes to admission officers and how they read files.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Okay, friends, I'm here with Susan and Hilary. Hi, Susan. Hi, Hilary.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Mark. Yeah, we're here together.
Yeah, and some of you might be thinking, where's Carter? Well, you're going to hear from Carter again, but I keep thinking of this statement that one listener said in our 2025 survey, which is, I love your podcast, but I don't like it when you use inside baseball terminology and I can't follow you. And so I was listening to it. You know, this consultant we hired, Nick and I, when we start the podcast, he said, listen to your episodes. That's how you get better. So I try to do that. And I noticed Susan and I started it, used the term buckets. Susan made a little comment on it. And not everybody may know what we mean by buckets. So I thought we would inject a discussion briefly so anyone who's not following what we mean by buckets, because it's kind of important to understand buckets, especially if you're building your own list, to know where you may be competitive and not competitive at. And then Carter will pick up on the next segment. So Hilary, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah,
sure. Susan, you can chime in.
Sure. Yeah. So when we talk about buckets, we mean that there are sort of different kinds of students who fit into different parts of the class who we're expecting to admit, right? So one bucket would be athletes. Another bucket might be musicians. Another bucket might be students who we can envision being leaders, either in the student council space or at CC in the outdoor leadership space. So when we're talking about buckets, we're talking about the different kinds of students who we might admit. It also can refer to a student's financial aid status. It can refer to students' legacy status, all of these sort of different institutional priorities that we might be considering during the admission process.
And one other thing I'd say is it's sort of who you're being compared to at some level too. So like if a school wants to have students from North Dakota, the student from North Dakota may not be competing with the student from New Jersey that could be overrepresented. Those could be very different. Also, particularly for national universities where major plays such a big role, it can be a very, very big factor. Susan, chime in. There's so much more we could say on this.
Yeah, well, the thing that we always have to remember is that as applications are read, they are rated. We've been talking a lot of late about the different rubrics that colleges use. And this is where there's a lot of variability among institutions, because the rating rubrics are there in an effort to bring some standardization, or as the statisticians call it, reliability to the ratings, where there has to be a minimum of subjectivity. We're human beings, so there's always some, but a minimum of subjectivity, so that as students are compared and compete with each other for limited spaces, it's done in a way that allows for a kind of truthful comparisons, if that's maybe an exaggeration. But so as readers review applications, they are rated. And, there are academic ratings, there are personal quality ratings, there are some colleges have fit or affinity ratings. It really depends on what an individual institution values. When college counselors talk to admissions people about this, sometimes they're quite transparent. And it's really helpful to counselors to understand more deeply what a particular college is looking to enroll. And those enrollment priorities or institutional priorities are reflected in the rubrics that allow the readers to identify particular talents, qualities, strengths, background. I love Hilary's term, and I use it now all the time. The compositional diversity of a class is defined differently, by each college and university. So some colleges, when a prospective student, raises a hand at an information section and says, what are your priorities for compositional diversity? You may get some information, but colleges have both public and private priorities, right? Mark's phrase of colleges want more of what they don't have really depends on the school. And, if a prospective family isn't reading the mission statements and the strategic plan, which is where a lot of this information is in some form shared, they're not going to know. The websites, admissions websites tell the public something about how applications are evaluated, and some colleges share a lot of information about what goes into their rubrics, and others are intentionally very private about that.
Friends, if you listen very carefully when I do my interviews, I often ask the senior leaders who I'm interviewing if they'll share their reading rating rubric with our listeners. And most of the time, the interviewees don't share the whole thing. Sometimes they'll kind of summarize it or share one component of the rubric, but occasionally one gets really transparent and shares the whole rubric. And it's incredibly helpful for our listeners when we get that level of transparency from them. But I do understand why they oftentimes like to keep it close to the vest and keep that as something that they feel like they can't disclose. And we're not listing all of them here. This is not exhaustive. Like, there's basic ones, right? Like, are you in a transfer pool or are you in a first year pool? We haven't talked about gender. Gender can be big. Gender could even apply gender to major, right? A male nursing applicant can be seen differently than a female engineer, applicant. So there's a lot of them, but the one thing that's really important for people to understand, and Susan just mentioned it, I say it all the time, colleges want what they don't have. It's really important that you understand, are you in an overrepresented bucket or demographics, or even beyond that, or underrepresented or moderately represented, especially if you're building your own college list? Because it's basically the equivalent of, I use this illustration a lot, and so I might have said it on the podcast. I know I've said it with my students a lot. I say, I own a McDonald's and my brother owns a Burger King. We have the same problem. Our drive-through lines are too long. So we both need to hire 10 people immediately. And so we decide to run ads, and we say minimum 2 years food and service experience, at least a GED, 2 good references. One problem, I get 14 applicants and he gets 100. Now he's looking at people with 5 years experience. He's looking at people, I can hire people that have been service managers before. Meanwhile, I might have to scale back what I want. I might have to go for like a month of food service experience and understanding that concept of supply and demand and whether you're overrepresented or underrepresented. It's really important to being able to self-assess your chances. So anything else you want to say on this? Go ahead.
Well, any university that reads for divisions of study. And so I've read for liberal arts, which is liberal arts colleges, and Hilary can speak to this, are still attentive to academic diversity because you have faculty waiting to teach kids in this full complement of academic programs. If not, they're going to start getting eliminated, which we've seen in the news just this week with some very high-profile universities eliminating dozens of academic degree programs, and they're just going to let those faculty retire and not be replaced. But shocking, other institutions, especially small liberal arts colleges, are really committed to offering the full complement of academic programs because it's what defines the genre of education. It was very different reading for a traditional liberal arts college for me than reading for a school that had a school of business, a school of engineering, and a school of arts and sciences. And within each of those schools, I was a first reader for all of them, but then applications went from first reading to admissions committees at those academic schools. And I think that's a pretty typical way of how it's managed. They go, from a first reader who does a general assessment and assigns ratings. And then the next level is an admissions person who's a specialist representing that committee, which has different priorities for engineering than it does for, a Spanish major. And there is different supply and demand, even within business and engineering. Some majors, the applicants are overrepresented. And in some cases, those majors are more finite in enrollment. I think of biomedical engineering is always one of the very toughest. Mechanical generally has the most room. That's kind of the general entry for a lot of, but so it's not as simple even at the liberal arts college level because of the trends in what young people are interested in studying. And I'd love to hear Hilary's take on this, actually, that, I know at the university I read for recently, a boy applying to the humanities, any of the humanities majors, expressing interest in those fields, was a rare and highly prized applicant. And we did everything we could. Now, it has to be a genuine applicant. It's like suddenly, well, I want to study French literature or philosophy or art history, and there's nothing to back it up. That's silly. But there's been such a throwing off of the numbers, and I don't know how that shows at a small liberal arts college.
Yeah, I think CC is a little bit different because of the number of outdoor programs that we offer. We tend to attract more male identifying students than maybe a typical liberal arts college does. So we still do have to think about gender balance, but not probably, we don't have to put as much effort into it as some of our peer institutions. And still, when we see a male identifying student applying for classics or literature or something like that, we're like, ooh, this is an interesting student. And especially like what you said, Susan, when it's genuine and when we see it backed up in the courses that they've chosen to take, like when I see a male identifying student who's taking AP Latin 5 and who has a Latin teacher who's writing their recs and who's really genuinely interested in classics, that's like a wow,
Yeah.
A super interesting student who you definitely want to pick up. And that's even here where we don't struggle as much with gender balance as lots of our peer institutions.
That's really interesting. That's very interesting. Some of the less common buckets too, I find very interesting. When I was at Bates in South Central Maine, we had a very big bucket for students from the state of Maine. And you may feel the same way about Colorado, where if you belong to a state where the public university is simply has been historically the pathway, and where you don't necessarily have an enormous percentage of high school graduates going to college. They when I lived in Maine, there were a lot of high school kids that went into the trades, thank goodness, and into other educational pathways. But the number got pretty small when they were looking at, 4-year bachelor's degrees, especially in the liberal arts. So, I think, Mark, you've referred to this as the backyard phenomenon of colleges. I think the University of Pennsylvania has the mayor's program for students applying from the Philadelphia zip codes, right? Where it's tied to either the mission of the school or a source of funding. But I thought of that as an unusual bucket. To get into a specialty bucket, the student obviously has to self-identify in their application without knowing that they're doing it in a way. But as we've talked about admissions becoming more evidence-based, as it's become more competitive, the evidence for match or fit, not just to the whole institution, but to what would we call it? The part of that institution that provides interest, balance, that enlivens the classroom, the campus community, has, I think, become heightened. So when I work, with a standard strong student who is certainly well qualified, I think I have to think really hard about how that student is going to build evidence in their application for the potential buckets that might advance them. Now that varies a little, and we have to, I have to teach the student in a way how to read about the school and figure out how to do that. But a lot of kids don't realize that what they've done and devoted themselves to could be an institutional priority at a college. Because sometimes
Susan, I'm so glad you said that. Because I do the same thing. And I think through that prism, okay, what buckets is the student going to be in? And how can we take who they are in authentic sense, but make them sound unique and interesting, and not just I've read so many kids that look like this. And, this is complicated to figure out. Even for us as counselors, we're always learning about this as well. Case in point, most private schools, I would say, have an institutional priority for faculty kids. A lot of them will have it for staff kids as well, administrators,
and staff too.
Yeah, staff and administrators. Yep. Case in point, Emory, I'll use them as an example. I've sat in their reading process and seen when staff kids come up, when faculty kids come up, when administrators come up. But the University of California doesn't have that at all. I've worked with quite a few University of California professors' kids over the years, and there is no institutional priority. I can't say that for every single school, but I know for the different ones I've worked for, there's not. So, something could be a priority for one school and not for another. But I just think it's important to understand this bucket concept and the concept of who am I competing against in one sense, and am I going to come across as overrepresented and underrepresented? I'll use Colorado College as an example right here. So I don't know if you remember this, Hilary. It was years ago. There was a student that I had that was really strong who applied ED and did not get in. And I was a little surprised just because of my sense of what the admission standard was and how strong the student was. And so, I just brought it up in conversation. And one of the things I heard was, do you know how many kids we get from that school? We get so many kids. And this is a school that was over 1,000 miles away. So I didn't necessarily know that. But the point was made that they were in a really, really competitive pool coming from that school. So anyway, just thought I would...
Yeah, that's going to strike horror into the hearts of many parents listening, I'm afraid.
I know.
Also, a lot has changed in college.
Okay for me to share that?
Yeah, it's fine. But I would say a lot has changed in college admission in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And I think that we're in a very different landscape. When that was that 4 years ago, Mark?
4 or 5.
Yeah. Our
admit
rates.
Student has graduated from college now, so it was
okay. So so maybe they were a 2021 fall or even a 2020 fall.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say for Colorado College and many, if not most, of our
Mhm.
peer institutions, this is coming from what we know from the Small College Consortium. Most of us have had a drop in application numbers. And so I would guess that that same applicant, if they had applied this year, would have been admitted.
Mhm.
Knowing what our ED pool looked like, and especially valuing those schools where we get a lot of applications. So that is a very scary story to hear as a parent. And also, 5 years in this admission landscape we have had huge changes. The TikTokification of the big school
Mhm.
experience and the sort of devaluing of the liberal arts until now this conversation is coming back because of AI. And now people maybe care more about a liberal arts education, but like it's not the same landscape as it was 5 years
It's
ago.
really
So
helpful.
parents,
Really.
please don't freak out, and don't
Yeah.
ask if we can only admit a specific number of students from one school, because there is
Yeah.
no limit, but there are
Yeah.
some that are more competitive groups than others.
Yeah.
But I would say that if they had applied this year, it probably would have been a very different story.
Yeah. And thanks for mentioning the point too about people really sometimes don't believe
Yeah.
that a school will take more than one kid from a school. Like they'll say
Yeah.
that all the time
Yes.
in
I
the
battle
counseling
that all the
room.
time.
Oh, I
hmm
get it all the time. Like, oh my goodness, so and so's applying to my kid is food,
Yeah.
and then
Mark,
so
I get it at book club with all my
yeah,
friends who have parents who are, or all my friends who have kids who are applying right now. And they're like, but we're at this really competitive high school. They'll only take one. No, if they're great kids, they're going to take as many
yes,
as they need.
yeah.
Oh
Oh,
my
and this is
gosh.
something else that's really important to mention. You can be from the same high school and you can be completely in different buckets. And
Yes.
that happens a lot of the times, maybe even most of the time. Like, so don't think that same high school equals same bucket, because I would even say probably most of the time it doesn't. It could just be off of gender and so many other things that you may be in different buckets.
Oh,
For sure.
Yeah.
absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
the issue when you have a really big group from a single school is curriculum differences really stand out.
Sure.
And that, I remember, years ago when I would read some of the New England private schools, boarding schools, especially, where I might have a school group of, between 50 and, maybe even 100. That's unusual. But the curriculum differences really stand out, because when you're reading across that many kids, you become very familiar with what's available at the school and what rigor means, or what preparation for particular majors mean. And again, that influences maybe the academic rating, but then a lot of the buckets are not academic. They are compositional,
Mhm.
right? And the enrollment goals, some colleges, we used to set our class enrollment goals the spring before, just when the recruiting season was starting. But now the recruiting season starts in like 9th or 10th grade. So colleges are front loading a lot of their priorities for recruiting and who they want in their applicant pool and who they want more of in their applicant pool. It influences where the admissions counselors travel, the kind of on-campus programming, where they're going to spend their money, their recruiting dollars. But then there are enrollment goals that are really long-term. And those the only place you're really going to find out about those are in the strategic plan, because, mission and values kind of represents the state of the union, the state of the current, framework values of the institution. That's the present. And the future is the strategic plan. So it's really interesting to read those, to kind of say, well, what does this college want to look like in 5, 10, 20 years? And that's very often overlooked.
Thank you so much for this. I'm going to have to cut this off. I could talk to these ladies forever about this topic because they're fun to talk to and I enjoy talking admissions, but we're going to move on to some other things. So thank you so much for that and for contributing. Thank you, Hilary. Nice that we could insert you into this segment.
Yeah. Happy to join.
All right, friends, we're going to transition to Michael's question once again with Hilary and Susan.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
We have a fantastic question, and it came in from a student. We love student questions. Hint, hint. And I don't mind parents saying, student, can you send it in? We don't know, right? We don't know what. So however we get it. So I'm going to play the question, and then Hilary, I'm going to ask you to start off.
Hi, my name is Michael. I'm a high school junior calling from the New York area. Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question about how to handle one big problem I have on my transcript. I'm generally an AB student in mostly honors classes. This year, I'm taking a few APs and also doing well. I also do lots of sports and activities outside of school. My weighted GPA is around a 3.8 through sophomore year. All that is great, but the problem is that I have a final grade of D in Algebra 2 in 10th grade. It's my only grade below a B- on my transcript. I really struggled in the class and specifically had some problems with the teacher, and I should have moved down a level from honors, but I didn't. Now, I'm really scared about what this one grade will do to me when I apply to college this fall. For what it's worth, this year in math, I have an A in regular level pre-calculus. Also, my guidance counselor said that she's going to address this D in her letter. My question is, how much will this one grade hurt me? My overall GPA may be in the range for certain colleges that I like, but will this D automatically disqualify me from them? For example, I'm wondering about big public schools that would be within reach without this grade. Do you have any advice, and are there schools that you think are more forgiving of a really bad grade? I appreciate you helping me as I finalize my college list. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
This is such a great question, Michael. Thanks so much for asking it. And gosh, ouch, that D in Algebra 2 in 10th must have really hurt after having so many excellent grades. So how much the one grade is going to hurt you is really dependent on what schools you're applying to. And so I thought that was a great question that you asked at the end, which schools are more forgiving of one bad grade. I'm probably not the best person on the podcast to answer that question, but Susan or Mark can address that part since they know other schools better than I do. But what I would say is that you're going to want to say something about this in your additional information section, address it, recognize that you didn't do your best work in that class. I would not throw the teacher under the bus in your additional information section. I don't think that will help you, but I would, as an admission officer who's reading this file, want to know, what did you do differently from Algebra 2 to pre-calc? Because you're getting an A now in pre-calc. That's awesome. We love to see that. I would want you to call that out, highlight it, and tell me, what did you learn from not doing so well in Algebra 2? What did you learn about your learning style? What did you learn about how you need to do your homework differently? What did you learn about asking for help? All the ways that you have taken yourself from a D to an A, you're going to want to address that in the additional information section. And if you have a good relationship with your counselor, you can have them address it also in their counselor evaluation. I don't know if you go to the kind of school where your counselor has the capacity to write an evaluation, but that would be a great place for that. And then perhaps in a teacher recommendation from your pre-calc teacher, that might also be a good place to get some sort of backup that you have the study habits and the work ethic required to do well in tough math classes. And that you'll be able, because what we're really wanting to know is, can you succeed in hard math classes once you get to our institution? And so we're looking for evidence of that. So that's three places, I guess, where you can kind of address that in your application. What do you guys think?
I think all those things were great, Hilary. I love the idea of definitely using additional information and definitely explaining what the change was, having it addressed by through the recommendation. Getting a pre-calc recommendation could be amazing. And that would be one where, might be nice to talk about character as well as academic prowess. Some of it is going to depend on the selectivity of the school. It is to a certain extent, but there's a lot of good news here. What always concerns me is when the D is in 11th or the D is in fall of 12th and the school's going to see senior year grades. It's really nice that not only was the D in 10th, but then you put together a really strong performance in 11th, and you have another opportunity to back it up in 12th. And even if you're applying early, and let's say a school were to defer you, well, they see a strong 12th grade on top of an 11th grade. I have seen students with these kinds of profiles get into some schools that might surprise people if everything comes together. But it really still depends on the school. Susan, what would you like to add?
Well, if I was sitting down with Michael, face to face, there are a bunch of things I would want to know. First of all, what does he envision studying in college? Because the consequences of a particularly low grade or a kind of a trip and fall would be much more consequential for an engineering or a STEM applicant in general, especially because he didn't repeat the class. And that's a big, big question for me, because a D, for example, he's going to have a higher grade in Algebra 2 in some state systems. For example, and you can prove me wrong, but in California, that's he would have to do recovery credit, what's called credit recovery for the University of California and Cal State system in Algebra 2. Now, things I know are changing this year or next year in the UC and Cal State system, but just a word to the wise that it's going to be highly unusual for a student to advance to pre-calculus without a higher grade in Algebra 2. Even though he went down a level for pre-calc, obviously his Algebra 2 issue was partially due to the teacher. And Hilary, you're absolutely right about, Michael has to own that. But he did no recovery of that. And I'm curious as to how he could be that successful in pre-calc with a weak foundation in Algebra 2, because that's the juncture in the study of mathematics that's probably the most important.
But Susan, this is where that explanation is important, because it could be something as simple as I was late on a couple quizzes and my teacher gave me zeros and there was no budging, there was no flexibility. Like, there could be a few things like that.
I agree, but it's a lot of the big universities aren't going to care about that. They're going to literally, they're going to disqualify him because the D will not give him credit in certain university systems. Now, but I only say that because I've run into that before, and I just am eager for Michael to look under all these rocks and make sure he doesn't apply somewhere and then find that out later. So he and his counselor should sit down and talk a little bit about that. The other thing that occurred to me is, as a young man, honors math in 10th grade is where a lot of cognitive maturity shows up. And a lot of boys especially, who were good at math in middle school and in 9th grade get placed in math over their heads. So I'm saying this to parents out there, that those of you who have kids like that, look carefully at the course placement issues. We've talked about this, Mark, a lot in math on the podcast, because as readers of application, this shows up all the time, that kids are cognitively not ready for it. Algebra 2 is where it shows up, because the math starts getting conceptual. And it's better to be a little bit of the tortoise rather than the hare if a student is kind of on the borderline of their giftedness, or whatever we call it in math. So just a general, it's a really common problem. And then if the student really is interested in STEM, it becomes an even bigger problem. And I'm not saying that's Michael's issue. He may have, totally other goals. He didn't. He sounds like a wonderful, solid achiever, well-rounded, the type of student that so many colleges are going to be excited to get an application from. The other thing I would say to parents out there, because there's an inclination on the part of parents to think, if we don't call attention to something, the colleges won't notice it, right? And you know what? They do. Readers always notice, and they always look, unless they're just admitting by the numbers, right? And we've talked about that before. Some colleges, they recalculated GPA, they have a formula, and you're good to go, or not. But in holistic admission, they for a blip on the radar screen, they're always going to be looking for exactly what Hilary articulated a couple minutes ago.
And I was going to say the same thing in closing that Hilary said, and both of you said, like, if there's only one thing you remember, Michael, you have to address this. You cannot leave it unaddressed. And one of the things that I've noticed is the rise of custom prompts that colleges have that specifically ask, is there any academic or circumstance where you've had a blip in your high school that you'd like to explain? And the reason why they do that is because admission offers really are pulling for you, and they would like to admit, but when they see things that are unexplainable, you're not giving them anything to work with. And that happens so often that schools have gone to actually prompting you to answer that question, so that people that maybe aren't getting counsel will say, oh, this is a good chance for me to talk about that. I wouldn't have talked about it. Hilary, you're going to say something in closing.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I mean, one of the things that he specifically asked was how much will this grade hurt him at big public schools? And Susan, you sort of addressed that credit recovery situation. I'm just wondering, I mean, we see sometimes that students will retake a course like virtually over the summer and end up with a higher grade in that class. Is that something that Michael should maybe talk with his counselor about doing based on his, what they know of his college list to look like?
I don't know, because he's already moved on.
Yeah, but maybe that then, well, if I saw that, what I would say is, okay, we've got proof that he can do the work in Algebra 2. Obviously, I should already assume that from his pre-calc grade, but like that might be able to sort of sit in that credit recovery space, right? Where then like the UC system can't say, well, you can't move forward in our process because you have a D in Algebra 2. If you've retaken Algebra 2, even if it's after, then you don't have a D anymore, I would assume. He could go back.
And I think universities have different ways of thinking about that. So I think the answer to your question is yes, he should speak with his counselor. If he's thinking about, especially large public universities, this information will be on their websites about, like in California, the A through G requirements, and if it's unclear, initiate a conversation with the admissions counselor and just talk about it honestly. You only gain points and assurance in your own application when you do that level of research. You don't want bad surprises later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and let me say something. I've shared this story before, but I'll share another detail because it's relevant here. So I was working with a student a few years ago that had one non-A in 9th and 10th, and then got 2 Fs and 2 Ds in 11th.
Ooh.
Now, why did that happen? The student was in the hospital for 85 days. The student got the treatment, got healthy, and by the way, that was 11th, so that's pretty closer to when you're matriculating. I said, this is not a student that can apply early. So the student did not apply early. The student went back to their straight A's, high tester, very high ACT score, and a very strong 12th grade, and got in a ton of big public schools. That's the schools that the student wanted to go to. So the student did very well with big public schools. Now, were they the hardest of the hard in the country to get into? No, but there are a number of schools that probably people would be surprised that the student was able to get into. So there still are big public schools that the student didn't go back and repeat all 4 of those classes. They didn't do that, and the student had a lot of success. One other thing, Hilary, and you tossed this back to Susan, and I know Susan well enough. I think I can speak for her on this. We can't throw out names here. We don't know enough. We just don't know enough. And that's probably true for almost any question that somebody sends in, says, give me some names. It's going to be rare that we're going to be able to throw a name out to look at because we just don't have enough context, and it would be irresponsible for us to do that. And I'm pretty confident from knowing Susan for 24 years that she would feel the same way on that. But thank you, Michael, for your great questions. Send us more. Thanks, Hilary.
Go get them, Michael.
Friends, I looked up how the UCs and CSUs would handle a D in Algebra 2 if the student got an A- in pre-calc, and I want to read to you what I learned. The student can be potentially admitted without repeating Algebra 2 because math is a sequential subject, And both the UCs and the Cal State systems have a validation policy that allows a higher course to fix a grade deficiency in a lower level one. So since the student earned an A- in pre-calc, and they've successfully validated the D in Algebra 2. So the A- in pre-calc proves to the admission office that the student has mastered the necessary mathematical concepts. So for both UC and CSU, a grade of C or better in pre-calculus validates the entire high school math requirement. The D still matters for the GPA, but the student does not have to repeat the course. So just wanted to include that in case there was any concerns about that part of our conversation. Friends, you now have 7 books you can pick from if we play your SpeakPipe question or comment or tip on the air. We have our 4 Princeton review books, The Best 390 Colleges, College Admissions 101, Essays That Kick Apps, and Princeton Digital SAT Prep. Our 3 new editions are The Calm College Method by Lisa Ruff and Lynda Depker, paperback or Kindle, Peter Pitt's Small College Magic Kindle version, and College Unmazed has a book, Your Guide to Design and Document Your Home School by Holly Ramsey and Michelle Everett, paperback edition. Our authors have generously agreed to cover the shipping and handling. Just send your name and full address, the book that you want, and the episode number where we aired your SpeakPipe question or tip. Please send that to your collegeboundkid@gmail.com, and we'll forward your request to the authors. All right, friends, we're going to transition to the College Spotlight on State Tech. Lynda and Lisa.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Okay, friends, this is a different kind of college spotlight. You know, we try to provide variety for you. Sure, we want to do spotlights on those extremely popular schools. We know there's a high demand for those schools, and that's what a lot of our listeners want to hear. We also want to shout out some under-the-radar schools that, you know, have great track record of excellence. And you know what? This is a unique spotlight because it's a 2-year school. And when do we ever do a spotlight on a 2-year school? So we're going to learn as Lisa and Lynda talk about State Tech in Lynn, Missouri, a 2-year school with a fantastic track record.
Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Lynda. How are you?
I am doing great today, and I'm excited to talk about a college spotlight that's a little bit different than what we usually do. So I don't know how you feel about that. I hope you're excited to take this short little journey.
Well, we all know that I am what you would call a novelty junkie. So I always want to do the next shiny thing. And I cannot wait to hear about this shiny thing that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about State Tech, which is a 2-year technical college in the middle of Missouri. I almost said the middle of nowhere, but that's not true. It's in the middle of Missouri, in a little town called Linn. And it is a small town, but it's only about half an hour away from Jefferson City, the state capital. And so
I'm wondering, there's only like 7 people listening who that made any sense to us.
I know, right? Well, but let me finish, because that means that it is about, maybe 45 minutes away from Columbia, where Mizzou is. So, it's not quite in the middle of nowhere, but when I drove out there a couple of months ago, it was a lovely drive. Not a lot going on around it. Anyway, which is why this is such a surprise, because when I got onto campus, I immediately thought, oh, I get it. I understand why this is such a popular school. And it is a really popular school in Missouri. And I think the word is getting out to states around Missouri that there's a special school 35 minutes away from Jefferson City. And so I really want to talk about it. And Mark was kind enough to let me chat about this school for a little bit, because it is different, but I think it's important And you know this, there's a lot of conversation going on about the value of a 4-year degree. And we always say, it's not for everyone. And this is another alternative. It is a 2-year school, obviously focused on technical. So let me give you some background about it and then hop in with any questions. So the school was founded back in 1961. So I guess technically a boomer school, not a Gen X school, but it named Linn State Technical College, and it became State Tech College of Missouri in 2014. And this is a public school, like I said, in the city of Lynn, which is only a population of about 1,400, and the school has about 2,000 students. So the town really is the school. And it's about 2 hours away from St. Louis or Kansas City. So when I say it's in the middle, it truly is. It has a national reputation for extremely high job placement. Their students are getting 99% placement rates. It is a very career-focused, hands-on educational model. They have banners all over employer's choice, and it really is. They have done a better job than any school I have visited, including other community colleges, of really working with industry partners. It is. I love that they have banners for employers all around. And that really makes a difference when you take a look at their labs and you see the Caterpillar equipment. And that's really what they're known for and part of what their mission is. Their mission statement, by the way, is preparing students for profitable employment and a life of learning. Now, can I tell you, I talk to a lot of parents who want to know the ROI. This school is very focused on the ROI of their students. It is a residential campus. They actually do have dorms for about 150 or so students, but the town of Lynn is welcoming to these students. So you can get that more traditional kind of campus feel, but it is going to be very different. They do have, student activities. They do have some athletics, baseball, track, but that's not why you're going here. Campus, dining hall, they have food, all of that kind of stuff. But what they really are known for are the unusual technical programs that you don't find other places. And one of the things that they do that I thought was really cool was they have the lineman program here. So, the guys, when there's a big blizzard or a hurricane and you have to have the guys come in to fix the utility poles and so we can all get our electricity and Wi-Fi and all of that. So they train those students. And this is a really high paying job. The average starting salary, I think, is around $80,000 for these students, and that can go up for a 2-year degree, which is not too shabby. They are really focused on AI proofing, their academics. Everything is very hands-on. They have more than 50 labs. For a school of 2,000 or so students, it's, I think, about 800 acres, so that they have a lot of space, which is good. Because let me just tell you some of the programs that they have. So they have the lineman program. So they have a lab where they have all of these utility poles that you.
That's so awesome.
And they're like miniature. So they're short. So you're not falling, I don't know how tall those usually are, 40 feet. I don't know. But yes, they have a lab, and I say a lab, but it looks like when I walked in, it felt like where you would go to a rodeo, because the ground is really soft and they have all of these utility poles. They have aircraft maintenance. So they have a hangar and they have aircraft, including helicopters and jets and all of this kind of stuff. One of the popular and more competitive programs is heavy equipment. And, so I was never the kid that played with the dump trucks or anything like that. But when I went to visit the campus, I was like, oh, that does look like fun. They have all of those big, giant trucks, and I don't even know what they're called, Lisa.
Yeah, I think even less about construction equipment and electricity poles than you do about sports. That's saying something.
That is true, and probably why I was gobsmacked
Right.
when I was on campus, because I was just like, well, this looks cool. Now, I mean, to be fair, I do fall in love with every single campus I'm on.
Yeah.
So it's just a natural, but being on campus and seeing, like, it's not theoretical, it's students actually doing the things. And I was really impressed with the partnership, like the diesel technology program. They have a partnership with Caterpillar. And so they have a Caterpillar lab that is just for students in this program. It is only Caterpillar equipment. And embedded in this is you get internship with Caterpillar. And those students are probably getting those high paying jobs with Caterpillar when they're done. So if you have students who don't want to go and sit in a lecture hall with 400 other students, but are really looking for those hands-on technical kinds of programs, this is the kind of school that is going to be like a dream location for them. And you find, a lot of community colleges will have welding programs or HVAC, and that's all well and good. State Tech has Safety Village, where they have constructed like 6 houses. So the students can come in and actually install the HVAC. They can install the electrical and all the different kinds of HVAC. So geothermal, all of that. And then they take it down, and for the next cohort, they can do the same thing. So they really go on and develop the space for students. So it's not, okay, we're going to repurpose this old building on our community college campus into this. I mean, it's very specific. And I love that. And the students do too. The students who are there I wouldn't want anyone to think that this is a school where you don't have pride in your education, because these students love this school. And rightly so. It caters. I tell you, one of the interesting things, I also, whenever I visit a school, I always go to the bookstore. And so they have a lovely bookstore with all kinds of gear in it. But I have never before seen a bookstore with tools. And Lisa, I don't know about your dad, but my dad was, his hobby was building things. So we had,
My father's hobby was not building things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So my dad, we had the giant tool chest, that was taller than me for most of my life, maybe even still. Well, there are all kinds of those things at the State Tech bookstore. And we can talk about cost, but some of the tools and equipment lists for these programs can go upwards of $7,000.
Yeah, I bet.
It's a lot, but that's okay, because you're going to make that back.
Right. And that's for your whole career. You're set up to then do the things that you need to do.
Exactly. But it was very interesting, to see things like that, instead of, I'm trying to think, when I go see my daughter, I see, like socks and that kind of stuff, and 50 different kinds of hand sanitizer and notebooks. But yeah, this was something different.
All right. So I have questions.
Yeah, bring them on.
All right. So how does a person get admitted to state tech?
So, this is the thing. It's not quite like a community college where it's open enrollment, where they take all comers. However, you do need to take a test, and you can supply an ACT, and they're looking for an 18 on the ACT. And you do have to have a 3.0 GPA for auto admit. Now, if you don't have the 3.0, or if you don't have the 18, you can take the AccuPlacer test and you can go through a review. So the bar is not as stringent as a lot of schools that we talk about, but they want you to be successful. So and they are looking for math, not necessarily calculus, but you have to have math, and all of the same things. But I was happy to see 3.0 and an 18 on the ACT. And that's for auto admit. Now, for out-of-state students, if they have that auto admit, meet that auto admit criteria, they automatically qualify for in-state tuition.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
And what would in-state tuition be for a person?
So it's based on credit hour, and the in-state tuition is $225 per credit hour. Out-of-state tuition is just double that. Now, some of the programs, it's higher. Heavy equipment, it's $580 a credit hour, because it's probably expensive to run those big, giant machines. But they have scholarships available. In Missouri, we have the A+ program, where if you meet certain criteria in high school, you get your first 2 years of community college or state tech at no cost. So that is absolutely an option. And they have a lot of scholarships. Employers love this school, and it shows with the scholarships that they make available.
Yeah, it's really, I think, a really interesting model, and one I really kind of feel like we should see more of, because that's what employers frequently ask for. That the schools, like whether it be community college or colleges, they're training people, but they're not training them for what the employers want them to do. And I remember hearing a podcast about a shoe designer at Nike who retrofitted a shoe design training program and was able to teach kids all the basics that he wanted them to have in order to design shoes. And all of those students are very successful. So I definitely think that there is a lot of logic to that.
It is for students who want to go out and start earning money and living their best lives. I think it's terrific. And I love the partnership with the industry, because exactly, they are telling you exactly what they want. And I just found my list of some of the programs that they have. Now, they do have a few more traditional programs like accounting, business, but they have the aviation, automotive collision technology, commercial turf and grounds management. So if you want to go work for a ballpark or a football team or a country club, you can certainly do that. The diesel technology. One of the things they have is they work on, and I forget what power sports technology. So in one of their labs, they had all of these wave runners. And they have a small lake on campus, and I'm like, so is this part of the activities? We're going to go down to the lake, and no, sadly, it's not. But somebody has to repair those wave runners, and so I am automatically thinking like, oh, so I could learn how to do this and pack up and move to the Keys, and that sounds kind of fun. But yes, so who is going to repair the wave runners, our forerunners, that kind of thing? They have nuclear technology, nursing, and then construction, precision machining technology, welding. So all different kinds of, I think there's 35 different majors that students can choose from. And they have all of the traditional things that you would expect on a college campus. They have tutoring available. They have a library. It's closed on the weekends, Lisa. So, which just made me chuckle because I'm like, okay, these students are busy doing other things on the weekends. And truly, a lot of them are, because the internships are a lot of times just embedded into the degrees along with certificates and things like that. So they have all of that traditional thing. Their career services, as you might imagine, is pretty robust. And they have a career fair each year, 400 employers coming
That's
to
awesome.
campus looking for these
For
students.
2,000 kids,
Exactly. Their retention rate for a 2-year college, this is almost unheard of. It's like 89, 90%.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
that's really
That's
unheard
great.
of for most 4-year colleges. Again, 99% of these students are employed within 6 months of graduation. And the average cost of this is probably around $14,000. There's some differences based on, because your fees might be high, like those tool kits that I was talking about, $7,000, versus like if you go with the accounting, it's not going to be quite as expensive. And then the average wages afterwards averages out to around, I think, 55 to 60,000, which again, for a 2-year school
That's
is
really
pretty
great.
good. And then depending on which program you go to, you could come out making upwards of 6 figures with some of those programs. So an alternative out there, a lot of times we talk to families and they have a student who's really looking for a hands-on thing, but maybe traditional engineering isn't the route for them. Something like this might be a viable option.
We all know kids who are incredibly smart and creative, but school, like traditional book learning, is just not interesting to them. But something like this, they would be great at. And they would, once they get this training, I'm sure be incredibly successful in whatever career that they choose. So, I hope that, I don't think we have a North Carolina state tech, but I'm going to look into that, because I hope we do, or if not, we should get one, because that is, really amazing. And it's going to keep a lot of talent in Missouri, and bring a lot of talent to Missouri, quite frankly. So.
Yeah, I'm sure State Tech hopes that we get those Illinois and Kansas and Arkansas students. And again, I think that it is an option for, like you said, who would be successful here? Students who want that hands-on learning, don't want to have to go through the theoretical kind of programs. It's structured. This is very, it is a structured program, smaller campus environment. If you want, tailgating, you're going to have to make the trip to Columbia for that. And students who are really career focused, who are thinking about getting a job and may not want to wait for 4 years to do it. So.
Yeah. And I think, working with some students who have learning differences, like for somebody with ADHD, for instance, like getting immersed in these hands-on things is really the best way that they learn. Or I could see like just having, just people with dyslexia in my own family, doing this kind of work would be such a relief, right? That you're not constantly, being forced to do something that's hard for you. Instead, you're playing to strengths that you have. So I think this is great. I definitely feel like you scratch my novelty itch, and I think we should do more stuff like this.
Yeah. It was a special place. Probably one of my favorite things is, they have golf carts. So I got to.
Oh, Lynda, you should go tour High Point then. They have golf carts there too.
I know. Can
Totally
I tell you?
different program though. Totally different.
My photos from this tour, because it is a little different. So I had to register just as a student, and I said I was interested in heavy equipment. And I think I really got them excited because they saw, a girl interested in heavy equipment, because I will say their gender ratio is a little off.
Yeah.
But I loved seeing my name up on a billboard, welcome Lynda, heavy equipment operations, and then, a golf cart.
See, that is definitely the High Point experience right there. Name, and then a golf cart. So okay then.
there is no steakhouse on campus. Just
no,
not even a Chick-fil-A, unfortunately. Anyway, so State Tech in Missouri, 2 thumbs up for the right student.
All right, excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing that with us, Lynda. That was awesome.
Thanks, Lisa.
Friends, on Monday's episode, you're going to get part 5 of our conversation on Standard Strong, what you can do to stand out in a competitive admission process. Carter's back. You'll be joined by Susan and yours truly. And then we've got a brand new interview for you. I recorded it this week. It's with Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Texas. We spend about half of the time on Monday talking about updates and some of the things going on at TCU. And then the second half, we talk about our main topic for the next 3 weeks, which is advice for students when it comes to resumes and the college admission process. Friends, if you're a regular listener, you know I'm a basketball junkie. I've been that way as long as I can remember. I remember being a little kid and watching Scott May and Kent Benson and Quinn Buckner and these teams like in the mid-'70s, and I'd stay up late at night and listen to like Cassie Russell and the Cleveland Cavaliers on my radio from my bed. So I was watching the women's championship, and it was pretty spectacular because UCLA has only won one time, and that time they won was like 50 years ago, before they were part of the NCAA. And now they're going up against the juggernaut, Dawn Staley, from University of South Carolina. Nobody really thought they'd knock off South Carolina. But not only did they beat them, they mollywopped them. I'm talking about 28-point victory. Destroyed them right from the start. And afterward, Corey Close, who's very impressive, as is Dawn Staley, coach of UCLA, was interviewed. And she made a powerful statement that I feel applies to all of us, adults or our kids, college or life. And this is what Corey Close said. The talent is our floor, but the character will determine our ceiling. The talent, that's just our floor. The character will determine our ceiling. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escabel in Massachusetts, Lynda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.